On February 26, 2026, negotiators in Geneva said a nuclear deal was within reach. The session had run nearly 14 hours. Mediators described it as the most productive round yet. On February 28th, the first missiles struck Tehran. By morning, the supreme leader was gone. In the 8 days that followed, more than 2,500 strikes hit the country. The combined weight of the American and Israeli air forces operating under code names Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. Over 1,300 civilians lost their lives. More than 6,000 were wounded. More than 300,000 were displaced from their homes. Between 168 and 180 of the dead were school children in a single elementary school in the southern city of Minab. And in central Tehran, the blast waves from strikes on nearby Arg Square reached a 400-year-old palace, one of 29 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in a country that most of the world knows only as a headline. The historic stained glass windows, Orsi panels set in intricate wooden lattice, each one handcrafted during the Qajar dynasty, shattered. Ceiling ornaments dating from approximately 1750, delicate plasterwork that had survived 2.5 centuries of earthquakes, revolutions, and wars, fell to the marble floor. The palace had survived every dynasty, every revolution, every conflict in 4 centuries. Whether it survives this one remains an open question. How did this happen? How did the civilization that wrote the first Charter of Human Rights, that freed the Jewish people from slavery, that built Persepolis and Isfahan, and the gardens that gave the English language the word paradise? How did this become the country that America, Israel, and the West treat as their greatest enemy? That is not a rhetorical question. It has a specific, traceable answer. And the chain of events that produced it begins not with religion, not with ideology, but with oil, and with the ground beneath one of the oldest
civilizations on Earth.
An hour's drive from the city of Shiraz, the landscape opens into a vast plain where colossal stone pillars rise from the earth, pale against the sky, scarred by fire. This is Persepolis. Built over 2,500 years ago by Darius the Great and expanded by his son Xerxes, Persepolis was the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid Empire, a dominion that stretched from the Indus Valley to Egypt, from Central Asia to the edge of Greece. At its peak, it governed an estimated 44% of the world's population. No empire before it had been larger. The grand staircase was designed with wide, shallow steps so that royal delegations from 23 subject nations could ascend in full ceremonial dress without losing their dignity. The stone reliefs along these stairs depict each delegation: Ethiopians carrying ivory, Babylonians leading bulls, Indians bearing gold, Afghans with camels. It is, carved in stone, an image of a world unified under a single administration. At the top of the stairs stands the Gate of All Nations. The name was not metaphorical. Representatives from Africa, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Central Asia passed through it. The columns that held the ceiling rise 65 feet. They are still standing. The Apadana Palace, the empire's main audience hall, could hold 10,000 people. Its cedar roof beams were transported from Lebanon. The treasury at the rear of the complex held wealth from 23 nations: gold, silver, lapis lazuli, ivory. When Alexander's army eventually looted it, Historical accounts say it took 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to carry the treasure away. In 330 BCE, Alexander of Macedon captured Persepolis and set part of the complex ablaze. The darkened patches are still visible on the stone. 2,350 years later, the scorch marks from that single night have not faded. Iranians know this. Every Iranian schoolchild knows this. The memory of Persepolis, what it was,
What was done to it?
and the fact that it still stands, runs through the national consciousness like a current. It is one of the reasons that modern Iranians view global politics through a lens of millennia, not decades. Empires rise and fall. They have watched it happen. They have been the empire that fell, and they are still here. But Persepolis was not just a monument to power. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, established something no conqueror before him had attempted. Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BCE without a battle. Once inside, rather than enslaving the defeated, he issued a decree. He declared freedom of worship for all peoples under his rule. He abolished forced labor. He allowed the Jews, held in Babylonian captivity for decades, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. The Hebrew Bible records this act. Cyrus is the only non-Jewish figure in the Old Testament to be called a Messiah. The decree was inscribed on a clay cylinder,
Roughly the size of a football.
and buried in the foundations of a Babylonian temple. It was forgotten for 2,400 years until British archaeologists unearthed it in 1879. Today, the Cyrus cylinder is housed in the British Museum. A replica sits in the United Nations, the earliest known charter of human rights. The country that Israel is currently striking is the country whose founding king freed the Jewish people from slavery. Iran is home to a Jewish community that has existed continuously for 2,700 years. Approximately 8,000 to 10,000 Jews live in Iran today. They maintain active synagogues, kosher restaurants, Jewish schools, and a constitutionally guaranteed seat in parliament. There is a distinction Iranians will make within the first 5 minutes of any conversation with a foreigner. They are Persian, not Arab. They speak Farsi, an Indo-European language more closely related to English and French than to Arabic. The word paradise comes from Old Persian,
Paradisa.
meaning walled garden. Across the semi-desert plateau, at the edges of the Dasht-e-Kavir, the Asiatic cheetah moves through terrain where few other predators survive. It is the fastest land animal in Asia, reaching 110 kilometers per hour. It once ranged from Arabia through India and into Central Asia. Today, fewer than 12 remain in the wild, and every single one lives in Iran. Iran is the last country on Earth where the Asiatic cheetah exists. Conservation efforts launched in 2001, jointly funded by Iran's Department of Environment and the United Nations, were making progress. Camera traps were deployed across 18 protected areas. Rangers were hired. The program was working. Then, sanctions tightened. International funding was cut off. UNDP support was discontinued because financial transfers to Iran became impossible under US banking restrictions. Between 1987 and 2018, 56 cheetahs perished from human causes. struck by
Vehicles on roads built through their core
habitat, or taken down by herders protecting livestock. The Asiatic cheetah now survives on the margins of a country that is itself being pushed to the margins. Whether this animal outlasts the current war is unknown. What is known is that if it vanishes from Earth. In the city of Shiraz, the morning light performs a transformation that lasts less than an hour. The Nasir al-Mulk Mosque was built in the late 19th century during the Qajar dynasty. From the outside, it looks like many Persian mosques, tiled domes, minarets, a quiet courtyard. But its architects understood the movement of the sun with an almost scientific precision. They oriented the western wall of the prayer hall to receive the first light of morning through rows of stained glass windows, each panel composed of geometric shapes in deep purple, ruby, amber, and emerald. As the sun rises, these colors spill across the hand-woven carpets and climb the stone columns. The patterns shift constantly. The red deepens, the gold brightens, the blues retreat, filling the entire room with kaleidoscopic light that is never the same from one minute to the next. It is a space where architecture and astronomy work together so precisely that the building itself becomes an instrument for capturing time. The display lasts less than an hour. Then the sun climbs too high, the angle shifts, and the prayer hall returns to the quiet of its stone slabs. It will happen again tomorrow morning. It has happened every morning for over a century. For the people of Shiraz, this daily event represents something the outside world rarely associates with Iran: color, beauty, deliberate joy. It continues each morning regardless of sanctions, regardless of headlines, regardless of what the rest of the world believes is happening here. A few blocks away, Shah Chirag, the King of Light, houses an interior most people outside Iran have never seen. Every surface is covered in millions of tiny mirror fragments, hand-cut and pressed into plaster at precise angles. Emerald chandeliers amplify the reflections until the chamber resembles the inside of a fractured diamond. For the pilgrims who come here, the mirrors are not decoration. They represent the fragmentation of the human ego in the presence of the divine. These are the spaces that exist behind the stone walls of a country the world has reduced to a single narrative. Shiraz is not a talking point. It is a city where people pray in rooms made of light. And it is from Shiraz, just an hour's drive from Persepolis, that the first crack in the chain becomes visible. Because the beauty above the ground has always been inseparable from what lies beneath it. Iran sits on the fourth largest proven oil reserves on Earth, 208 billion barrels. It also holds 15% of the world's natural gas. In 1908, British prospectors discovered the largest oil field in the Middle East beneath Iranian soil. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, later renamed British Petroleum, BP, was formed to extract it. A vast refinery was built at Abadan on the Persian Gulf Coast, which became the largest oil refinery in the world. For 4 decades, Britain took the lion's share. By the late 1940s, Britain's tax revenue from the company exceeded the total royalties paid to Iran. Iran received roughly 16% of the profits from its own oil. Mohammad Mossadegh was elected to parliament on a platform of changing this. In 1951, the Iranian Majlis voted unanimously to nationalize the oil industry. Mossadegh became prime minister. The British response was immediate. They organized a global boycott of Iranian oil. Production collapsed from 242 million barrels in 1950 to 10.6 million in 1952. When economic pressure alone failed, Britain turned to the United States. The CIA assigned the operation to Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt arrived in Tehran with a suitcase of cash. The first coup attempt on August 15, 1953, failed. CIA headquarters cabled him to abandon the operation and flee the country immediately. He ignored the order. Over the next 4 days, Roosevelt paid street mobs to stage demonstrations, bribed newspaper editors, convinced Mossadegh's supporters to stay home, and turned military officers against the government. On August 19th, paid demonstrators flooded the streets. Radio stations were seized. A false broadcast announced that Mossadegh had already fallen. Military units surrounded his home. Tanks rolled through the streets of Tehran. By nightfall, Iran's democracy was over. Mossadegh was arrested, tried in a military court, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Upon hearing the verdict, he reportedly said with quiet sarcasm, "The verdict of this court has increased my historical glories. I am extremely grateful you convicted me. Truly, tonight, the Iranian nation understood the meaning of constitutionalism." He was kept under house arrest until his passing in 1967. His foreign minister, Hossein Fatemi, was executed by firing squad. Hundreds of National Front supporters were arrested, imprisoned, and subjected to brutal interrogation. After the coup, a consortium agreement was signed. 40% of Iran's oil fields were handed to American companies. The remaining shares went to British, French, and Dutch interests. Iran, the country whose oil it was, received the terms it was told to accept. The CIA publicly acknowledged its role only in 2013, 60 years later. Declassified documents released in 2017 revealed that even after the first coup attempt failed, CIA headquarters believed the operation was over. Roosevelt's decision to ignore the order to flee and attempt a second coup was unauthorized. The reshaping of the modern Middle East hinged on one man's refusal to follow instructions. One American diplomat who served in Tehran during this period later reflected, "The removal of Mossadegh was, in my estimation, a tragic mistake. We caused, in effect, the Khomeini revolution by doing that." He was right. 300 kilometers north of Shiraz, the city of Isfahan unfolds into what many consider the most ambitious urban design in the Islamic world. Naqsh-i-Jahan Square stretches nearly 1,600 feet from end to end, one of the largest public squares on Earth, larger than Red Square in Moscow, larger than the Place de la Concorde in Paris. When Shah Abbas I completed it in the early 17th century, he wove together faith, commerce, and royal power into one harmonious rectangle. The Shah Mosque anchors the southern end, its towering entrance angled precisely to align with Mecca while maintaining the visual symmetry of the square. The engineering required to reconcile these two axes, the square's geometry and Mecca's bearing, is concealed within the entrance passageway, where the corridor turns imperceptibly to redirect the worshipper. The Sheikh Lotfolla Mosque sits to the east, its cream-colored dome shifting hue through the afternoon as the light changes. Pale gold at noon, warm amber by 3, deep rose at sunset. A single whisper inside the prayer chamber can travel across the tiles and return amplified by the precision of the vaulted ceiling. Along the 2-story arcades, merchants have traded Persian silks and spices for 4 centuries. They still do, even under sanctions, even under an economy that has lost 90% of its purchasing power in 8 years. Inside the Ali Kapu Palace, royal balconies still overlook the field where polo matches were once played. Along the banks of the Zayande River, the COC Pole Bridge stands on 33 stone arches that have sheltered the social life of Isfahan since 1602. It was built not as a simple crossing, but as a tiered gallery, 2 levels of stone walkways where people could escape the heat, share news, listen to musicians, and watch the water. The river no longer flows. Upstream dam construction, over 40 dams on the rivers feeding this basin, and chronic water mismanagement worsened by decades of isolation from international engineering cooperation, dried the Zayande for most of the year. Where water once ran, residents now walk across the exposed riverbed, and in the evenings they gather beneath the arches and sing traditional songs about the river's return. They sing about water coming back to a river that may never carry it again. And they do it beneath a bridge that has survived every war, every invasion, every revolution in 400 years. Isfahan is also the location of one of Iran's nuclear facilities, the uranium conversion plant that processes yellow cake into the feedstock for enrichment centrifuges. The same city whose mosques change color with the afternoon light is the same city whose outskirts contain the infrastructure that brought the world to the brink. Beauty and strategic consequence occupy the same geography. They always have. The Shah, installed by the CIA after Mossadegh's overthrow, ruled for 26 years. He created Savak, a secret police trained by both the CIA and Israel's Mossad. Savak operated a network of informants, detention facilities, and interrogation rooms across the country. Political opponents, intellectuals, journalists, and labor organizers were systematically targeted. Methods included prolonged solitary confinement, electric shock, and suspension by the limbs. Amnesty International reported that Iran under the Shah had among the worst records of political prisoner treatment on the planet. The United States was fully aware. American advisors helped train Savak agents. Military aid flowed, billions of dollars in weapons, fighter jets, and naval vessels. The Shah became the single largest purchaser of American arms in the world. In return, he kept the oil flowing, opposed Soviet influence, and recognized Israel. But the more the Shah modernized the economy, the more visible the contradictions became. A wealthy westernized elite in Tehran and a population that watched its democratic government be overthrown and replaced with a monarchy that answered to Washington. The 1953 coup was not forgotten. It was discussed in every household, every university, every mosque. In 1978, the pressure broke. Millions took to the streets, leftists, nationalists, students, merchants, and clerics, all marching together against a regime that had been imposed from outside. In February 1979, the Shah fled. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile in Paris and established the Islamic Republic of Iran. On November 4, 1979, students stormed the American embassy and held 52 diplomats.
For 444 days,
They called the embassy a den of spies and cited the 1953 coup. They had found shredded CIA documents inside the building, which they painstakingly reassembled and published. The documents confirmed years of covert American operations run from the embassy compound. The hostage crisis cemented Iran as a villain in the American consciousness. ABC's nightly America Held Hostage broadcast ran for 444 episodes. For an entire generation, Iran meant fanaticism. What most Americans never learned was that the chain leading to that embassy door being broken down began with oil, passed through a CIA officer ignoring orders, and ended with a nation that had watched its democracy be dismantled, deciding it would never allow that to happen again. Across the Alborz and Zagros mountain ranges, the Persian leopard, the largest leopard subspecies in the world, hunts bizarre ibex along cliff faces and elevations where most predators cannot survive. For decades, it was considered extinct in every neighboring country. Then Iran, working alone, under sanctions, with no foreign funding, launched a conservation program that rebuilt the population. Camera traps documented the recovery. Rangers were trained. The result was one of the most remarkable conservation successes in Asia. Persian leopards are now retaking territories across the Caucasus and Central Asia because of what Iran accomplished in complete isolation. The country the world sanctions is the country that saved a species the world had given up on. No one talks about this. The next link in the chain was chemical weapons. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran. The war lasted 8 years. Over 1 million people lost their lives on both sides. It remains one of the deadliest conflicts since the Second World War. The United States officially remained neutral. In practice, it tilted heavily toward Iraq. The Reagan administration provided Saddam with satellite intelligence, battlefield coordination, and dual-use technology. Declassified CIA files, released in 2013, revealed that Washington supplied Iraq with targeting data for chemical weapons strikes, with full knowledge that Saddam's forces would deploy sarin, tabun, and mustard gas against Iranian soldiers and civilians. More than 100,000 Iranians were casualties of chemical weapons attacks. The city of Sardasht, a Kurdish town in western Iran, was struck with mustard gas in June 1987. It was the first time a civilian population center was targeted with chemical weapons since Guernica. Survivors still fill veterans' hospital wards across the country. The damage from nerve agent exposure, blindness, chronic respiratory failure, neurological deterioration does not heal. It progresses, slowly, for decades. The international community said nothing. No sanctions were imposed on Iraq. No Security Council resolution condemned the use of chemical weapons against Iran. The Chemical Weapons Convention was not signed until 1993, 5 years after the war ended. On July 3, 1988, in the final weeks of the war, the USS Vincennes, an American guided missile cruiser operating inside Iranian territorial waters, fired 2 Standard missiles at Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian Airbus A300, on a scheduled route from Bandar Abbas to Dubai. The plane was climbing through 13,500 feet. It was broadcasting on a civilian transponder frequency. All 290 passengers perished. 66 were children. The captain who gave the order, William Rogers, was later awarded the Legion of Merit for his service during this period. The United States never formally apologized. Vice President George H.W. Bush, campaigning for president at the time, told the United Nations, "I will never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are." Iran remembers every one of these events the way Americans remember September 11th. Each act of external violence reinforced the conviction held by the regime and by many ordinary Iranians who despise the regime that the outside world cannot be trusted. In 2002, President George W. Bush named Iran as part of the Axis of Evil alongside Iraq and North Korea. The timing was particularly bitter. In the months after September 11, 2001, Iran had quietly cooperated with the United States against the Taliban in Afghanistan. Iranian intelligence shared targeting information. Iranian diplomats attended the Bonn Conference and helped shape the post-Taliban government. James Dobbins, the Bush administration's special envoy to Afghanistan, later described Iranian cooperation as critical to the success of the Bonn process. The reformist Iranian president at the time, Mohammad Khatami, had been seeking a diplomatic opening with the West, a policy known as dialogue among civilizations. The Axis of Evil designation humiliated his government domestically and empowered every hardliner in Tehran who had argued for decades that America could never be trusted. The moderate path was discredited overnight. The confrontational path was validated. In 2003, Iran reportedly sent a comprehensive proposal to the United States through the Swiss embassy, offering to negotiate on every issue, including its nuclear program, recognition of Israel, and support for armed groups. The Bush administration reportedly did not respond. The proposal, later known as the Grand Bargain, became one of the great might-have-beens of modern diplomacy. Each time Iran reached out, it was rebuffed. Each time it was rebuffed, the hardliners grew stronger. Each time the hardliners grew stronger, Iran became more difficult to negotiate with. The cycle was not mysterious. It was predicted by diplomats, by scholars, by analysts who watched it happen in real time and documented every step. Iran's nuclear program began, ironically, with American encouragement. In the 1950s, under Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, the United States provided Iran with its first research reactor. The Shah was encouraged to develop nuclear energy. American and European companies competed for contracts to build Iranian power plants. The program was a symbol of the modernization the US wanted for its ally. The Islamic Republic inherited this infrastructure and expanded it through the 1990s and 2000s, assisted by designs obtained through the network of Pakistani scientist A.Q. Khan. But there is a context that rarely accompanies the headlines about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran is the only country in modern history to suffer mass chemical weapons attacks, including on civilian population centers, and receive no international protection or consequence for the attackers. For Iran, the lesson was unambiguous. The international system will not protect you. If you want to ensure you are never gassed again, never invaded again, never overthrown again, you need a deterrent that makes the cost of attacking you unacceptable. Whether that deterrent should be a nuclear weapon is the question that has defined 3 decades of diplomacy. But the desire for one is not irrational. It is the product of specific, documented events. Events that the countries now demanding Iran disarm played a direct role in creating. Southeast of Isfahan, the landscape hardens into something older and more austere. Yazd has maintained continuous habitation for several thousand years. Mud brick walls absorb solar radiation by day and release it after sunset. Hundreds of rectangular towers, badgirs, wind catchers, rise above the rooftops. They capture high-altitude breezes through vertical vents and channel cooler air downward into living quarters. External pressure differences pull warm air upward while circulating cooler air through the rooms and into subterranean water reservoirs. The temperature reduction is measurable, 18 degrees Fahrenheit, without electricity or mechanical power. Beneath the streets, qanats, hand-dug tunnels dating back 3,000 years, transport water from mountain aquifers using gravity alone. The engineering is precise. A master qanat builder, called a Makani, would descend into the tunnel through vertical shafts spaced at regular intervals, digging horizontally toward the water table while calculating the slope needed to maintain flow over distances of up to 70 kilometers. Some qanats in Iran are still operational after 2,700 years, older than the Roman aqueducts by centuries. UNESCO has recognized Iran's qanat system as a masterwork of hydraulic engineering, one of the most significant feats of pre-industrial water management in human history. This is the civilization that solved air conditioning and long-distance water transport 1,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. The same engineering mind that calculated the precise gradient of a qanat over 70 kilometers also designed the stained glass windows of Nasir al-Mulk to catch the sun at exactly the right angle. And today, because of sanctions, this civilization cannot import replacement parts for its modern pumps and water treatment plants. On the ridges at Yazd's desert fringe, twin stone towers rise against the sky, the Towers of Silence, where Zoroastrians practiced sky burials for centuries. Zoroastrianism was born in Iran, one of the world's oldest monotheistic faiths, predating Christianity by at least a millennium. Its influence runs through every Abrahamic religion. The concepts of heaven and hell, a final judgment, angels and demons, the cosmic struggle between good and evil, all have Zoroastrian roots. Even the 3 wise men of the Christian nativity story are widely believed to have been Zoroastrian priests. The towers are roofless, cylinders 30 feet high, their stone-paved interiors divided into 3 concentric rings. The dead were placed at the summit for consumption by vultures, men in the outer ring, women in the middle, children at the center. This was not neglect, it was theology. Zoroastrians consider fire and earth sacred elements that must remain pure. Burial would contaminate the soil. Cremation would violate fire. The sky burial returned the body to nature's cycle without polluting either element. In the Atash Beram temple, a sacred fire has burned without interruption for more than 1,500 years. Through the Arab conquest, through the Mongol invasion, through the revolution, through the current war, someone always has kept the flame alive. In 2015, after 12 years of escalating tensions and 2 years of intensive negotiations involving 6 world powers, Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. The terms were specific, measurable, and unprecedented. Iran reduced its operating centrifuges from 19,000 to 5,060. It capped uranium enrichment at 3.67%, far below the 90% needed for weapons-grade material. It shipped 97% of its enriched uranium stockpile, over 8,000 kilograms, out of the country to Russia. It poured concrete into the core of its Iraq heavy water reactor, permanently disabling its ability to produce weapons-grade plutonium. And it accepted the most intrusive nuclear monitoring regime ever imposed on any nation, including continuous camera surveillance, unannounced inspections, and environmental sampling at declared and undeclared sites. In return, nuclear-related sanctions were lifted. Iran's GDP grew 12.5% in a single year, the fastest growth rate in decades. Oil exports resumed. Airlines began ordering new aircraft. Foreign investment returned for the first time in years. The IAEA confirmed, in report after report, quarter after quarter, that Iran was in full compliance with
every provision of the agreement.
Not partial compliance, full compliance. On May 8, 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement. Iran was complying. Every other signatory opposed the withdrawal. Trump's maximum pressure campaign reimposed every lifted sanction and added new ones. The total number of U.S. sanctions designations on Iran tripled to over 1,500, targeting banks, oil exports, shipping companies, airlines, individual officials, and entire sectors of the economy. The effect was devastating. Iran's oil exports dropped from 2.5 million barrels per day to below 500,000. The rial, which had traded at 42,000 to the dollar in 2016, collapsed past 600,000 by 2020 and kept falling. By March 2026, it would pass 1.5 million, a loss of more than 97% of its value in a decade. Inflation surged. Food prices doubled. Meat became a luxury. The middle class, the educated, urban, westernward-looking population that foreign policy experts had long identified as the natural constituency for reform, watched its purchasing power evaporate. Hospitals reported shortages of cancer drugs, insulin, and surgical equipment. The banking sanctions made it nearly impossible to process international payments, even for humanitarian goods that were technically exempt. A patient in Tehran needing a specific chemotherapy drug that Iran did not manufacture could not receive it. Not because it was sanctioned, but because no bank would process the transaction for fear of U.S. penalties. Iran responded the way every analyst predicted. Enrichment climbed from 3.67% to 20%, then to 60%, a short technical step from weapons grade 90. The stockpile grew from near zero to 440 kilograms, enough, if further enriched, for 9 nuclear weapons. Breakout time collapsed from over a year to less than 1 week. The agreement that had verifiably constrained Iran's nuclear program was dismantled
By the country that demanded
Iran have no nuclear program, and every consequence that followed was the direct, predictable result. And while the chain tightened, Iran continued producing art and scholarship that the world consumed without knowing where it came from. Rumi, the 13th century Persian Sufi mystic born in what is now Afghanistan, is the best-selling poet in the United States. 800 years after his death, his verses on love, loss, and spiritual longing outsell every living American poet. He wrote in Persian. His full name was Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Balkhi. Most Americans who share his words on social media do not know he was part of this civilization. Hafez, born in Shiraz, buried in Shiraz, wrote poetry so central to Persian identity that a copy of his collected works sits in virtually every Iranian home. Families open it at random to receive guidance, a practice called Fal-e-Hafez, treating the 14th century verses as a living oracle. His tomb in the Musalla Gardens remains one of the most visited sites in the country. The word algorithm derives from Al-Khwarizmi, a Persian mathematician whose 9th century treatise established the foundations of modern algebra. The word algebra itself comes from the Arabic title of his book. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine served as the standard medical textbook across European universities for 500 years. The director, Asghar Farhadi, has won the Academy Award for Best International Feature Film twice, in 2012 and 2017, making Iran one of the most honored countries in the history of the category. More than 65% of Iranian university students are women. Iran produces over 90% of the world's saffron. It has the highest rate of rhinoplasty per capita on the planet. In Tehran, the surgical bandage has become a status symbol, worn proudly in public. These facts do not cancel the regime's repression, its treatment of dissidents, its
enforcement of mandatory hijab,
or its support for armed groups across the region. They coexist with those realities. That is the point. Iran has never been one thing. No civilization that has lasted 7,000 years has ever been one thing. Deep in the Central Plateau, the Iranian ground jay moves across rocky terrain in quick, darting runs. It is the only bird species endemic to Iran, found nowhere else on the planet. It spends most of its time running rather than flying. If Iran's desert ecosystems collapse, this species vanishes from Earth. There is no backup population, no captive breeding program elsewhere. It lives or dies with the land it evolved to inhabit. Iran sits on one side of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage just 21 miles wide, through which 1/5 of the world's daily oil supply passes. 20 million barrels, roughly $500 billion worth of energy per year. Iran did not seek global attention. Its geography made it impossible to ignore. In the Persian Gulf, near the strait's narrowest point, Hormuz Island, the Rainbow Island, displays volcanic hills banded in yellow, purple, and orange. The beaches are crimson, stained by iron oxide, so concentrated that waves appear to run red. The islanders collect the edible red earth to make surak, a traditional sauce mixed with salt, orange peel, and fish. It may be the only place on Earth where the landscape and the kitchen are the same thing. On nearby Keshem Island, 2 million years of erosion have carved Stars Valley into a labyrinth of sandstone pillars rising 200 feet. The local name means the fallen star. At sunset, wind whistles through the crevices with a sound so unsettling that locals refuse to enter after dark, believing the canyons are guarded by jinn. On January 3, 2020, an American drone strike at Baghdad International Airport took the life of Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds force and the architect of its entire regional proxy network. Soleimani had spent 2 decades building what Iran called the Axis of Resistance, a web of allied armed groups that gave Iran strategic depth without a conventional military capable of competing with the United States or Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon was the crown jewel, funded at an estimated $700 million annually, armed with 150,000 rockets and capable of striking any point in Israel. Hamas in Gaza received between 100 and 350 million per year, along with rocket technology, tunnel engineering expertise, and military training. The Houthis in Yemen, described by analysts as Iran's cheapest proxy, disrupted Red Sea shipping with attacks that cost the global economy an estimated $200 billion in 2024 alone. Militia groups in Iraq and Syria, organized under the Popular Mobilization Forces, numbered roughly 165,000 members across 67 armed factions. The total cost of this network, estimated between $700 million and $2 billion annually, was a fraction of what a conventional military buildup would have required. It allowed Iran to project power from Beirut to Sana'a without deploying a single Iranian soldier across its borders. Iran retaliated for Soleimani by striking Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq with ballistic missiles. The Pentagon initially reported 0 casualties. Later, more than 110 troops were diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries from the blasts. Hours after the strike, in the heightened alert, Iran's air defenses accidentally shot down Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 over Tehran. All 176 passengers were lost. October 7, 2023, changed the calculus permanently. Hamas's attack on southern Israel triggered a chain of operations that systematically dismantled everything Soleimani had built. Hamas's senior leadership was eliminated, including Yahya Sinwar. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, fell in a September 2024 airstrike, along with much of his command structure. Syria's Assad regime collapsed in December 2024, severing Iran's main weapons supply route to Lebanon, the corridor through which rockets, drones, and missile components had flowed for years. In June 2025, Israel and the United States struck Iran's nuclear facilities directly for the first time, using 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bombs, the largest bunker-busting munitions in the American arsenal, against the enrichment sites at Natanz and Fordow. The 12-day operation devastated Iran's above-ground infrastructure, but the underground storage tunnels at Isfahan, where the 440-kilogram uranium stockpile was believed to be held, proved too deeply buried. Even the 30,000-pound MOP could not reach them. Iran's proxy network, the strategic depth that was supposed to deter exactly this kind of attack, offered little more than statements of condemnation. The unity of fronts doctrine, the theory that all proxies would activate simultaneously to overwhelm Israel, had failed its ultimate test. By February 2026, Iran stood alone. Its proxy network was shattered, its conventional military was degraded, its economy had been under siege for 8 years. Its own people had been in the streets protesting the regime, the largest demonstrations since 1979, just weeks earlier, with a death toll that human rights organizations estimated between 3,000 and 7,000. And in Geneva, Iranian and American negotiators were sitting across from each other, closer to agreement than they had been since 2015. On the fringes of the Dashti Lut, where NASA satellite instruments have measured ground temperatures of 159 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest surface on Earth, the Persian onager moves between water sources at 43 miles per hour. The Dashti Lut itself is a landscape of extremes that defies human habitation. Wind-carved ridges called yardangs rise 200 feet from the desert floor and stretch 80 miles across the horizon, resembling the ruins of a city that never existed. Vast areas of black basalt absorb so much heat that the environment is nearly void of microbial life. Scientists use it as an analog for Mars. The Persian onager, smaller than a horse, pale-coated, built for endurance, survives on salt-tolerant shrubs and moisture trapped beneath basalt crusts. Its light coat reflects extreme solar radiation. Only a few hundred remain in protected areas like Kar Turan National Park. Survival in the margins, making use of what little is available, moving fast enough that the desert cannot quite catch you. Three rounds of nuclear talks took place in early 2026, mediated by Oman's foreign minister, a country that had served as a quiet bridge between Iran and the West for over a decade. The first round in Muscat on February 6th produced cautious optimism. Both sides agreed to a second session. The second round expanded the scope of discussion beyond enrichment caps to include sanctions relief sequencing and verification timelines. The third, on February 26th in Geneva, ran nearly 14 hours, the longest and most substantive session of all three rounds. Iran's foreign minister told reporters that a historic agreement was within reach. The American delegation acknowledged that significant progress had been made on the central enrichment question. Omani mediators described the atmosphere as serious and constructive. The gap between the two sides remained real. The US demanded that Iran destroy its Fordo and Natanz facilities, surrender all enriched uranium above 3.67%, and halt enrichment permanently. Iran refused to discuss anything beyond nuclear issues and insisted on its sovereign right to peaceful enrichment. But the distance between these positions was narrowing. Both sides agreed to a fourth round. A date was being selected. On February 27th, embassies in Tehran began evacuating. American, British, and European diplomatic staff were ordered to leave within hours. The Israeli military mobilized 20,000 additional reservists on top of the 50,000 already on duty. On February 28th, 2026, at 1:15 in the morning Eastern Time, the first strikes hit Tehran. The opening salvo targeted Leadership House, the compound of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in central Tehran. Israeli intelligence, gathered over years of surveillance, had pinpointed his precise location. The strike was carried out by Israeli aircraft. Khamenei was struck down along with his wife Mansoura, his daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild. Approximately 40 senior officials, the defense minister, the IRGC commander, the army chief of staff, and the head of intelligence, were gone within the first hours of the operation. In an 8-minute video released on Truth Social at 2:30 in the morning, President Trump stated that the purpose of the strikes was effectively regime change. He cited the hostage crisis, support for proxy groups, and the pursuit of nuclear weapons. He urged IRGC members to lay down their weapons. The operation was codenamed Epic Fury by the United States and Roaring Lion by Israel. Approximately 200 Israeli fighter jets participated in the opening wave. Over 8 days, the United States and Israel conducted more than 2,500 strikes, using over 6,000 weapons, destroying what the Israeli military claimed was 80% of Iran's air defense systems. The US and Israeli air forces achieved what commanders described as near-complete air superiority, flying uncontested over Iranian airspace. Iran fired over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and approximately 2,000 drones in retaliation. Roughly 40% targeted Israel. The rest struck at US bases and allied nations across the Gulf: Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and Qatar. Dubai's international airport was struck by drones multiple times. Saudi Arabia intercepted 16 drones heading for the Sheba oil field. Kuwait alone intercepted 178 missiles and 384 drones. 6 American service members lost their lives in a strike on a base in Kuwait. Iran's President Pezeshkian delivered a televised address, apologizing to neighboring Gulf states and promising not to target them further unless they attacked Iran first. The apology did not stop the strikes. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE all reported fresh attacks the following morning. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows, was effectively shut down. Not by a naval blockade, but by insurance. War risk premiums soared so high that major shipping companies, Maersk, CMA CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, suspended transits entirely. Oil surged past $90 a barrel, its highest since mid-2024. US gasoline prices jumped 30 cents in days. The cost of the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury was estimated at $3.7 billion, most of it unbudgeted. In the Gilan province, 1,000 stone steps ascend through fog-shrouded forest to Rudkhan Castle. 1,500 yards of stone walls along the Alborz ridges, 42 watchtowers never breached in its history. Moss covers the masonry. Sunlight rarely reaches the floor through the beech and elm canopy. The surrounding terrain is home to the Persian leopard, the same species Iran saved from extinction while the world was sanctioning it. It moves through these forests undetected. Along the Caspian coast, the Hyrcanian forests, UNESCO listed, older than the last ice age, form a green belt that has survived since before human civilization began. Iran contains multitudes, desert and rainforest, the hottest surface on Earth, and ski resorts above the clouds, cave villages and nuclear facilities, the world's oldest fire and the world's newest war. In the East Azerbaijan province, volcanic cones reaching 60 feet in height define landscape that resembles another planet. 700 years of manual labor hollowed out these formations to create Kandovan, a cave village where several hundred people still live inside the mountain. The porous stone holds a stable temperature of 70 degrees, regardless of season. Households use the ground level for livestock and upper floors for living quarters, connected by staircases carved into rock. No timber, no mortar, just volcanic ash supporting an entire community as it has for 7 centuries. Further west, Lake Urmia, once 2,000 square miles, once the largest lake in the Middle East, has lost 80% of its water. Over 40 upstream dams redirected the rivers that fed it. International experts offered solutions, but sanctions complicated every collaboration. A 9-mile highway now crosses the basin where ships once sailed. Abandoned docks stand on dry ground miles from water. Dust storms carry salt into agricultural land, poisoning the soil. The catastrophe unfolded in slow motion, visible to everyone, fixable by no one who was permitted to try. In the northwestern plateau, 5.5 miles of interconnected brick vaults form the Tabriz Historic Bazaar, the largest covered market in the world. It has functioned since the Silk Road era. Specific sections specialize in Persian carpets, copperware, and spices. Cumin and saffron fill the vaulted galleries. Merchants still use handwritten ledgers and traditional weighing scales. The brickwork itself records the intersection of Turkish, Persian, and Caucasian cultures. Layers of civilization built on top of each other, each absorbing what came before. The deadliest single incident occurred on the 4th day. A strike hit the Shajare Tayyeba Girls Elementary School in Minab, Hormozgan province. The school sat roughly 60 meters from a military compound, close enough to be within the blast radius, far enough that no reasonable targeting analysis would have identified it as part of the military target. Between 168 and 180 school children did not come home that day. Their ages ranged from 6 to 12. Israel denied responsibility. The United States Central Command opened an internal investigation. A New York Times evidence review, based on satellite imagery, munition fragment analysis, and crater measurements, concluded the strike was increasingly likely carried out by a U.S. munition. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights described images of the children's backpacks, scattered across the rubble, still zipped, still containing pencils and notebooks, as the essence of destruction, despair, and senselessness. No country has claimed responsibility. And in Tehran, the blast waves reached Golestan Palace. Golestan is Tehran's only UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its construction began in the 16th century under the Safavid dynasty, when Tehran was still a small town on the trade route south of the Alborz Mountains. As the city grew into a capital, the palace grew with it, each dynasty adding halls, gardens, and ceremonial spaces that reflected its own ambitions. During the 19th century, the Qajar rulers imported large sheets of European glass to create the mirror halls that would become the palace's defining feature. The mirrors were transported by caravan across the Zagros and Alborz ranges, a journey that took months over mountain passes that reached 10,000 feet. Many of the sheets shattered in transit. The roads were too rough, the passes too narrow for cargo this fragile. Rather than discard them, artisans gathered the broken shards and pressed them into wet plaster at varying angles, creating the mirrorwork known as ayine kari. Millions of hand-cut fragments, catching emerald chandelier light in geometric configurations that turn entire halls into continuous mosaics. The marble throne veranda, 65 pieces of yellow marble from Yazd,
Shams al-Emire,
rising 5 stories, its stained glass casting color across the floors. Art, made from what was broken. Beauty, assembled from damage. On the night of March 1st, the blast waves shattered the historic Orsi windows, stained glass set in intricate wooden lattice. Ceiling ornaments from 1750 fell in the marble throne hall. The museum collection, paintings, manuscripts, ceramics, had been moved to secure storage in January during the protests. That decision, made for a different crisis, saved artifacts that would otherwise have been lost. The palace director told reporters through tears, "The objects in this palace are like my children." Iran has 29 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, the 3rd highest total in Asia. Under international law, deliberate damage to sites of this significance constitutes a war crime. Golestan survived the Qajar dynasty. It survived a constitutional revolution. It survived the Islamic Revolution. It
survived the Iran-Iraq War.
It survived the protests of 2022 and the protests of 2026. Whether it survives this depends on decisions being made in rooms thousands of miles from its shattered windows. In the desert southeast of Yazd, the Persian horned viper lies buried beneath the sand. The raised scales above its eyes give it its name. It spends daylight hours invisible, hidden beneath the surface. At night, it emerges. Invisible, adapted, enduring beneath the surface, surviving not by force, but by patience, outlasting the heat, the cold, and whatever passes overhead. As of this recording, the war continues. No ceasefire exists. No back channel has produced results. Iran's foreign minister has said Iran sees no reason to negotiate. The American president has demanded unconditional surrender. The enriched uranium stockpile, 440 kilograms, enough for 9 weapons, survived the strikes. The underground storage at Isfahan proved too deep
for even the largest bunker-busting bombs.
Iran's nuclear knowledge cannot be struck from existence. Russia's foreign minister warned that the strikes would produce forces in favor of acquiring a nuclear weapon, precisely the cascade the strikes were meant to prevent. The Omani mediator, who facilitated the Geneva talks, expressed dismay that active and serious negotiations had been interrupted by military action. A 4th round had been scheduled. The negotiators believed progress was real. Negotiations on February 26th, strikes on February 28th, diplomacy and destruction separated by 48 hours. The Cyrus cylinder sits in the British Museum. A replica sits at the United Nations. The civilization that created it, that freed slaves, that declared freedom of worship, that built Persepolis and Isfahan, and the gardens that gave the world the word paradise, has 29 UNESCO sites and a fire that has burned for 1,500 years, and a cheetah that exists nowhere else on Earth, and a palace whose ceiling ornaments from 1750 now lie on the floor. There is no clean ending to this story. The war is not over. The palace is not repaired. The cheetah may not survive. The nuclear material is still there, intact, inside the mountain at Isfahan. The same mountain the bunker-busting bombs could not reach. The rial has collapsed past 1.5 million to the dollar. More than half the population struggles to feed itself. Over 100,000 people fled Tehran in the first 48 hours. An internet blackout, imposed since February 28th, prevents anyone inside the country from telling the rest of the world what is happening to them. And the chain that began in 1953, when a CIA officer ignored his orders and spent 4 days dismantling a democracy to control a country's oil, has not yet reached its final link. Was any of this inevitable? Or was there a moment in a negotiating room in Geneva on February 26th, or in a radio station in Tehran on August 19th, 1953, or in
The White House on May
8th, 2018, where a different choice would have sent the chain in a different direction, where the palace would still have its windows, where the school in Menab would still have its children, where the cheetah would still have a future. The answer matters, because the next link is being forged right now. And 7,000 years from now, someone will look back at this moment and ask the same question every civilization eventually asks about the ones that came before. What were they thinking? If this documentary changed what you thought you knew, consider subscribing. More journeys are coming. Thanks for watching.